Okay, so how to think about overlapping action is it's natural. It's a natural force. We don't always perceive it. It's something we feel, just like the actual movements when we do a walk. When you had to animate how to do a step, you really had to think about how the step is animated, how it works, what parts of the body would move first, etc. Overlapping action is the same. So while I talk for a minute, in and on D2L, for those of you at home, in this class file section on D2L, give this overlapping action in class and swinging objects a good old download. And for those of you here in class, that overlapping action in class is under the exercise files. And that swinging objects is inside of your project files folder. So you can find the overlapping action one here in exercise files, and that swinging pendulum is right here under project files. So overlapping action is any action that follows our main action. It allows for us to have weight. It allows for the timing to have a little bit more decisiveness to how the action is actually moving. What were some of the examples that she gave or that he gave about what we could use as overlapping action? Tails. Anyone remotely remember anything we could use as overlapping action? Hair. A couple of people said hair. We could also use it as clothes. We can use it as our arms. You can do individual fingers. Think about how when you make a fist in your hand, how do the fingers curl in? Are they curling in from the tip here, or they curl in from your actual joint first? How do things offset to give more weight, more dynamicism, or dynamicism, and things like that. So think about, what do you want your material to be made of? Do you want it to be something loose like ribbon or string? Light like a feather? Do you want it to be rigid? Or a little bit bendy, but not too much so? Depending on how you overlap certain objects, that was the same animation. They just had slightly different overlapping action times. So how you change that overlap will change how your animation is perceived by other people. So go ahead and the Maya file we're going to open is this one here. It's that overlapping action in class. And when you open it, you might have to make your visibility here on the ball layer be visible. So if you haven't opened it yet, go ahead and do so. just ready for the trees to stop being full of pollen. And for it to stop being so humid. I am more than ready for that. Yes. Okay, so in this Maya file, I went ahead and made my playback speed here. Play every frame max real time. Real time will also work quite well. So what we have, and we can see it on our graph editor, is just this lead ball is moving back and forth, and all of them are moving with it. Now, when you are doing overlapping action, this is the method I recommend most that you do for animating something with overlapping action. Animate your whole object, your whole character, your whole overlapping, everything all at once. So all of these are moving at the same time, but I know I want that second, third, fourth, and fifth ball to all be offset by 1. I want it to look more like a chain, less like a rod. So I'm going to hit stop here. And I'm going to make sure my outliner over here is open. So I have my ball that's A, B, C, D, and E. Just by shifting all of our keyframes over 1, we can easily change that overlapping action. So on B, C, D, and E, so I'm going to highlight all of those because I want all of them to shift over 1. That's a ball that's number C, that'll be shift over 2. D would be shift over 3. E would be shifted over 4. Because we want to have these act in that overlapping way, make it look more natural, whereas right now it looks very odd and stiff. So I just have all of these highlighted here. And all I'm going to do is just shift, click, and drag my entire timeline and just move it over 1 frame. And I'm just going to snap it. So when I hit play now, the 4 underneath that lead ball are now following it. It's starting to appear like there's momentum to that lead ball, and all of them are following, right? So let's do the same thing, but minus that B. So I've got C, D, and E highlighted still. I'm just going to highlight all my keyframes again and shift them over 1 more. So we start to get this kind of stair-stepped movement, making sure I snap. So now it's starting to appear like that ball at the very top is leading the other ones. So again, I'm going to do same thing. I'm going to undo C, shift, click, and drag, shift over 1 more, and then snap. And I'm going to do the same thing with E. I'm going to go ahead, shift, click, and drag, shift it over 1 more, and snap. And just on this frame itself, you can already tell that we've got a more natural motion, right? It has this appearance like it's moving through space, like all of them have, or a new link on a chain. So when they move, now it appears that this ball at the very top is guiding all of them, and it looks more dynamic, right? It's a lot more natural, and it feels like they're moving in space in 3 dimensions, even though they're not, almost, just because of how they're moving in that little offset way. So if we were to offset one of these, let's say C, one more, how would that change the overall animation? It now puts C in line with D here. Slightly changes things. So I'm going to shift B and E. Since they're already offset one, I'm just going to shift them over just one. So it makes the lower half look like it's a little bit heavier. So just by changing that offset by one, you can easily get a slightly different animation. So let's take a look at this in a different way. So let's turn off the ball layer and turn on the pendulum one here. When I hit play, the pendulum moves one way, kind of overlaps a little bit, comes back. Everything all kind of moves with it. So the first thing we have to think about is, how do we want this to move? Do we want it to move heavily? Do we want it to move lightly? Do we want it to move more like how a shoulder or an arm would, or like wrist and fingers, quicker on the bottom, faster at the top, that sort of thing? Be thinking consciously about what kind of animation, the weight, all of that when you're animating overlapping action. So we already have the main action. You don't have to worry about keyframing or changing that main top pedestal. But how you change how the lower part, the arm of this pendulum works, will change everything else about the animation. So the first thing we have to think about is, what should that first step that we do be? So this goes for everything from how a character walks to how you would move a cat's tail or maybe whiskers if it's an emotion. What do we need to do first after we get that main animation finished? When you are making animations like this, you don't want to be focusing on your overlapping action as you're going. You want to get your poses and your main animation fluid all together before you start this step. So I already have that part done for you. We already have it moving. But how would you make this look like it's heavy or light? So if I wanted to make this be heavy, how would I animate that? With overlapping action. Any ideas? No? So if I wanted this to be heavy, I'd have smaller, more subtle motions. And if I wanted this to be light, I'd have it be a lot bigger, a lot more range of motion. So let's give that a shot. So the first thing I want to do here is figure out, when does my pendulum top here start moving? So it starts moving on frame 10. So let's set a keyframe. I'm going to open up my little tabs here on the side so I can see arm A, arm B, arm C, and arm N. I'm just going to set a keyframe on each one of these arms. You no longer have to worry about getting yelled at for using the S key. We're back to using it. That part of your lives is now over. So we know right here on frame 10 is where this arm starts moving. Now, we will be changing this a bit, because when that top arm starts moving, we're not immediately going to have that arm itself coming up. If I'm moving, sure, my arm's going to move, but it's going to wait for my body to shift before I slide my arm and let it settle. So what we have to do is figure out how much of a weight, what kind of material do we want this to be made of. So I'm going to say mine's going to be relatively light. So I'm going to click that top arm, and a couple of frames out, I'm going to say maybe frame 20 or so, is when that arm is going to start rolling up. So I'm going to use my rotate tool here, and I'm just going to rotate that arm A, then arm B, arm C, and that end, and then keyframe all of them. Because what I want to have happen is I want it to look as though it's nice and light, the lower, this top one. So if I do it up here, that's going to make it appear like it's really light. Maybe it's a plastic chain, maybe it's a feather, maybe it's a ribbon. If I have it way down here, it's going to appear like my chain or this arm here is heavier. Maybe it's made of metal, maybe it's a heavier plastic, maybe it's just more rigid. So how you have this curl will change how your animation will be perceived. So I have mine here. So if I go back to frame 10, I'm going to use the greater than and less than arrows. So I have, it's still at rest, it starts to move, and now we need to see here on our animation, where's the next point when our box would stop. So this is where it starts to go back in the opposite direction, right? So when you think about how something moves, if you sling your arm forward, it still is going to bounce back a little. Anything you do will have a recoil. This is another form of overlapping action. So here is when that recoil is going to start going in the opposite direction. So I'm going to go ahead and on my arm A, I'm going to roll it in the other direction. And then set all of those keys. And then just to see what we have, I'm going to hit play. So it already looks like it's got weight to it already. There's some things that might need tweaking, but overall it's starting to look pretty good, right? It's looking more natural, even though we haven't even offset anything else other than that one main action of that curl. So we have our motion, it goes this direction. Now think about when, have you ever taken a chain and shook it back and forth? It'll slowly settle, same with a pendulum, same with your arms. If I drop my hand, it'll bounce. You still want to get that settle, even if it's subtly, in almost every type of animation. So I'm going to go out a couple of frames, maybe to frame 60 or so, and I'm going to move it in the opposite direction. But keep in mind that there is still gravity and drag being affected, affecting this arm here. So every motion, so every time it goes back and forth, it's going to become a smaller, subtler motion. So this next movement where it goes back in the opposite direction is going to be smaller than the last one. So the first motion that we did was very large. Remember, I was making mine kind of light. The second motion, when it goes in the opposite direction, may have equal or slightly less than range of motion. There we go. And then since it's still settling, we know we have to slowly get it down to where it is still. So I'll go out another few frames, do the same thing. Again, just as subtly. Things are getting a little slower. Might actually be a little too much. So we can see from this keyframe to here, here, here. A few more frames out will be very subtle. Arm B will have less motion, similar to arm A. Same with arm C and the end. When finally they all might even out. Seems a little fast at the end, but we can always move those keyframes out a bit. So it starts to look like it has weight, momentum, drag, different natural forces going on it. There we go. So we can feel that with my animation here, something doesn't feel right. Right? Anyone put their finger on it? On why it feels off? Yeah. The last half is a lot faster than what the weight was of the beginning, right? So we can change that just by changing this second arm motion. So if I just move it a little bit lower, timing still feels a bit off, but it feels a little bit more natural, right? So this would still need a little bit of tweaking, but it's close, right? Now, this is the part where you would go in, because I have my main animation done, I've got my arm moving, I want to start adding overlapping action. I want to get it to start overlapping a little bit more than it already is. However, right now is when you want to go in and fix your curves. So if I wanted this first bounce right here, this very first one, to be a bit sharper, from 10 to 20, I would want to go in and change that curve now. If I wanted this middle part right here, where it is about to swing across to the other side, to be sharper, even if it's just on that one arm piece, I need to change the curves now. It'll be a lot easier to see where timing issues are if you do this before you start offsetting your keyframes. Now it might also help to have hold frames in the center. Between keyframes, those are those moving holds where there's a slight pause to your animation. If I wanted this right here, right in the middle, between these two to be a little bit more relaxed, I could set a keyframe here. And ease that. I could then change how its tangents move. Maybe make it a little bit more linear. And then remember, I'm only doing this right now on one arm piece. It's just this top arm A. So it makes it hold that one little spot a little bit more. If I don't like it, I can remove it and change things as needed. So this is the time when you would take a few minutes on each one. So I'd go to arm B and I'd be like, yeah, I think right here needs to have another keyframe. Maybe here I'll just even out my arm, make it so it's not wiggled at all. Maybe I'll do that for both arm C and arm B. Or maybe I'll just have that end be a little offset. And see how that changes my action. So this is the time when you would do that. Any questions so far about the process with overlapping action or anything like that? Anyone remotely have any questions? Okay. So what we'll do now is I'm going to select my arm B, C, and end here. And I'm just going to offset their overall keyframes. One keyframe, just like what we did with those balls we just did. I'm going to make sure I snap every time I move them. Just shift them down one. And that looks a lot more natural. There's still one keyframe or two that might need to be shifted. But overall, it looks pretty natural. Yeah? Just by offsetting those keyframes after we've gone through and done our curves, will make it easier on you. And it'll be a little bit easier to offset. Now from here, if I'm like, hey, I really want that arm B or arm C to be offset a little bit more. So if I'm like, hey, let's offset these one more, how would that change our animation? Feels a little bit weightier. Maybe it's got more of that end is probably a bit heavier. Just by shifting things around a little bit, you can get completely different animations. The same thing goes for if you're doing fingers, if you're doing a walk cycle, if you've got someone jumping, how you offset the limbs from the main torso or the fingers from the palm will change how your overall animation is. So if I were to change something about this curve to make it appear like it hit a wall and bounced off, what would I want to change about the curves at that point? At what point would I want to change the curves? Anyone? How would I change them? When would I change them? If I wanted this to appear like it's hit a wall? Anyone? So remember, we would want to do that before we offset everything. And then we would also want to make our first swinging actions appear as though it would be hitting that wall itself. So a couple things to think about when you're doing project 1 is what material are the arms that you're going to be animating made of? Are they light, rubber? Are they made of metal? Are they made of plastic? Are they feathers? Are they a bit hollow? So are they lighter? How are they interacting with the motion so that you can show what kind of force that they're using? Is there an arm that stops things? Is there anything in the way of your object? How would it actually interact naturally? You can also think of it as something like a tail. How would a creature use your tail or use a tail to show its emotion, to convey that it's alive? Think of it in that way as well. So let's move on. No one seems to have any questions. It is early in the morning, so that's all right. So project 2 is called Pendulum. So why do we have this as a project? Overlapping action is what makes things feel more realistic, feels less robotic. And we can also tell that there's forces in motion, and it allows you to be able to change how that works based off of timing, drag, and that little overlapping action. So what exactly is project 2? So I had you guys also download this swinging pendulum Maya file. What this is I have 3 pendulums here. That are each doing different things. So in the main process of things, I have already animated the big movement for you. You need to be able to show me how things overlap. How's forces acting on these pendulums? Are they light? Are they heavy? Are they metal? Are they made of lead? Are they made of paper? You need to show me how they're moving based off of what they're doing. So the top one is just like the exercise we just did. It's just a little bit longer. The second one here hits that block and bounces. And that third one gets pushed by a block and slows down real slow. Now, what do I want here? And when is it due? So what I want you to do is animate all 3 of these pendulum arms here to have natural movement, to have that nice overlapping action, do things settle as a wobble, do things bounce like it's been hit. How are these moving naturally to give them weight and timing and show that there's natural forces in whatever world this would be taking place in. It will be due on a day. So it will actually be due the 15th. So I do have that written down on there correctly. So that is next Monday. So not this one, but the next one. What that means is the rest of today's class will be a work day, and all of next week will be work days for you. So I don't take attendance on those days. However, I will be in here. And if I'm not, I will be on Zoom the whole time during the class time. So if you do have questions and you're like, hey, this just isn't working out, I'm not sure what to do, we can take a look at your graph editor, we can take a look at your keyframes and figure out what's going on. I do want this fully rendered. MP4 format turn in. I don't need to see your Maya file for this one, so you're off the hook. You can hit the S key to your heart's content. Don't turn it in as an AVI just like normal. AVIs are really, really big. Have it at least at the QuickTime or MOV format if you can't do MP4 for whatever reason. And then we'll also have critique on that day. We'll still be doing a lecture, so we'll still have normal class time. We'll still be meeting either in here or remotely in your own home on that day. And then we'll be starting project 3 on that same day that it's due, and that is a character. So this will be your last real fundamental project. But this one's really fun. A lot of people have had some issues with some of it. I'll see if I can't find an example of some of them done really well. From what I've heard, that second one is pretty hard for some people. Other people think the top one's hard and the second one's easy. So depending on how you animate it, it can either be nice and challenging, or you might find it simple. You might get this done today and be like, yeah, I'm done. I don't need to do anything. Or you might get it done like 10 minutes before class. I've seen both. Just make sure you're nice and rendered before. Does anyone have any questions at all about overlapping action? This project, the due date? I'm going to find some examples to show you before I let you guys go of what some other people have done here, so you're not flying blind. But anything, questions at all? Is everybody awake? Some nods. I saw a few nods. No. Roughly awake. Okay. So give me a moment. I'll see if I can't find an example or two. So some examples of what others have done. So depending on how you animate them will change how it'll look. So you're going for nice and natural, you're going for good timing, nice drag. Add in holds as needed. So if there's a frame where you're like, I need this to hold that frame a little bit longer, add that in, make sure it's in there. And that's all I have for today. I wanted to give you guys some time to work on it in class. If you need to see any more examples, I'll be putting some of those videos up on D2L for you if they're not there already. And that's all I have. Those of you remote, you guys good? All right. I'm going to end the remote Zoom session. I will be opening it right back up, so if you do have a question, just pop back in. I'm going to get this processing so I can get it up on the server and on D2L for you guys.